Hi, this is Mrs. Evans. Today we're learning about important versus irrelevant information in a text. Important information is going to be those things that are going to support our main idea, those things in the text that have to do with what the passage is about. So when we're reading a passage, what's important are going to be those things that are important to the overall story. What is mostly what the story is about? What is the story mostly about? What is relevant? What is important to the main idea, and what we're trying to learn from the story? Irrelevant would be all those things that are not really related to that main idea or to what's mainly going on in the story. Let's go ahead and look at our text. We are going to read a story called Sister War. A long line of silver tape ran down the middle of Kira and Stella's bedroom. It zigzagged a bit at one end to allow both sisters to use the door. On each side of the room, there was a bed and a nightstand. The closet was on Stella's side of the room, so Kira got the dresser. Since the desk was right in the middle, each sister got a set of drawers, but neither one could sit at it to work. The tape was part of the sister war that had started the week before. Neither sister was sure how the war began. It might have started when Kira borrowed something from Stella without asking. Maybe it began when Stella left dirty laundry on the floor, or when one of the girls spilled orange juice on the other one's homework. However it began, it turned into a full-blown war. Kira and Stella had decided that there was only one way to keep the peace. They divided the room in half and agreed to stay on their own side. It was the only thing they had agreed on in a week, but it didn't work out as planned. So we're going to pause there for just a moment and let's take a look at this. On here, they describe how the tape was in the room. They said it zigzagged a bit to allow both sisters to use the door. So here we're explaining how the room was divided. But thinking about the main idea so far, if we look on here, our first paragraph talks about how the room was divided. But then they also mentioned that neither one can sit at the desk. So they divided the room, but they couldn't use everything in their room. And then the tape was part of the war. And in the second paragraph, they just start describing the war between the two sisters, which relates to the title Sister War. They give some examples of what may have possibly caused the sister war. And then in the third paragraph here, they decided that to resolve their problem, which was that they couldn't get along in their room, and was to split the room in half. And that was how they tried to keep the peace. So the way the room was divided wasn't so important to the war as how it began and the idea that they were dividing it to help save the peace. Let's go ahead and get to the second half of our story. When Kira tried to read a book, Stella blasted music from her side of the room. When Stella tried to make a braided string bracelet, Kira turned off the light switch on her side of the room. It seemed that splitting the room in half only made the sister war worse. However, everything changed when their mother shared some surprising news. She explained that she would return to work in an office. That meant that she no longer needed to have a home office in the spare room. Now, the girls could each have their own room. Kira and Stella were overjoyed. They flipped a coin to see which one would move into the spare bedroom, and it was Stella. Along with Stella's bed and nightstand, the tape line was removed from the room. Kira enjoyed reading and doing homework in peace. Stella could now blast her music with the door closed and not bother anyone. Before long, Kira wandered into Stella's room to ask for some craft string to make bracelets. Stella knocked on Kira's door to ask for help with her homework. Eventually, the sister war was forgotten. Even though the girls bickered now and then, they had enough space to keep it from blowing up into a fight. That was such an interesting story. I'm sure some of you may have had a sister war, a brother war, some kind of conflict with your sibling when you weren't getting along. When I was a child, I had a similar sister war with my sister, and we did divide our room in half too. It was pretty interesting, and it didn't work out well for us either. So let's go ahead and look at our text here. So it says, when Kira tried to read a book, Stella blasted the music on her side of the room. And so that was an example of why the sister war didn't work. And so they talk about they give more examples like Stella trying to make a string bracelet and just telling us how the war got worse. And then their mom got an office, was returning to work and would have an office at work. So now the spare bedroom could be one of the girls' rooms. And so they got to have their own room. And look at this. All of a sudden, they're getting along. They're being respectful of each other. They're knocking on doors and asking for help. They're able to shut the door to keep the music from being too loud. And they were able to take the tape out of the room. So looking at this, we know that having their own room was important to the sister war. And so it was important that their mom got an office at work so that she can lose her spare bedroom. Now let's go ahead and go to a practice page here. We're going to sort some information from the text, and we're going to see, is it important or is it irrelevant? So let's look at some of this. We have, it seemed that splitting the room in half only made the sister war worse. Is that important to the main idea of the text, that the sisters were having a sister war because they couldn't get along? I would say yes. This will be important information. So I'm going to put this right here. Let's look at the next one here. It says, she no longer needed a home office in the spare room. Now the girls could each have their own bedroom. Well, that was important to the war. So splitting the room in half made the war worse. So that was important to the war because they had to get worse so that they can get it. It got worse before they got it resolved. Here, the girls having their own bedroom resolved their problem. It helped solve their sister war. Let's look at this fact that says, it zigzagged a bit at one end to allow both sisters to use the door. Was it important to the overall story how the tape was on the floor, whether it zigzagged or not? No, it did not. It was not relevant. So I'm going to put this as irrelevant information. Let's look at another piece of information from our text. It says neither sister was sure how the war began. Was it important whether they remembered how it began? The main idea of this story is that the sisters were having a war. They had a conflict. They had a problem. They couldn't get along, and they separated their room. Regardless of why it started, the main problem is that they were having the war, and they needed to fix that problem. And it talks about and how they split the room to fix the problem. The main point of the story wasn't how the war got started. It was how the war was resolved. I'm going to put that as irrelevant information. Let's look at another piece of information from the text. It says the tape was part of the sister war that had started the week before. So was the tape important to the story? So they did use tape to separate their rooms. But is that important enough to be a relevant fact in the story? I'm going to say that no, it's not important that the tape was part of the war. They could have separated the room anyway. Just the important part was that the room was separated. Let's look at this one. It says Stella blasted music from her side. Was this important or is this irrelevant to the story? This one could be a trickier one. Stella blasting her music irritated her sister, which made the war get worse. And so I'm going to say that was actually important information because blasting her music made her sister really upset. Kira wandered into Stella's room to ask for some craft string. Now, asking for some craft string after the end of the story without arguing was actually very important because it showed that they were able to get along, that she was able to go into Stella's room and ask for something, and then they didn't fight afterwards, and it didn't bother her. And the last piece we have here is Kira got the dresser. Was this important information or irrelevant information, whether Kira got the dresser? I'm going to say it was irrelevant. It didn't matter who necessarily got the dresser, because if she got the dresser and she got something else, it evened out in the end, and it wasn't important to the war overall. I hope you enjoyed my video. I'm excited for you to get to do your independent practice, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening.